Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, Senator Sinodinos. I refer the Turnbull government's decision to cut around 200 positions at the CSIRO. Won't these cuts to the CSIRO strip away the organisation's remaining climate science capacity and reduce the monitoring of climate change in the Southern Hemisphere? Can the Minister confirm that both the Prime Minister and Minister Pyne signed off on these cuts?
The Cabinet Secretary representing the Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, Senator Sinodinos.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the honourable senator for her question. The short answer to your question is no, and I'll explain why. First and foremost, what's happened with the CSIRO in this announcement is an operational decision of the organisation. After an extensive review by the management of CSIRO, they stated that the need to reorganise the organisation to better fulfil its mission as outlined in its strategic plan. Advice from the CSIRO is that the realignment will take roughly 2 years and that there will be no net job losses. The advice from CSIRO is that there will be no net job losses across the agency. As such, any suggestion that this was a result of changes to the CSIRO budget is incorrect. And it's not the role of the Prime Minister or the Minister for Science to sign off on staffing changes of an independent agency. I can also add that there's a realignment of activity within the Climate Change Division. But the stories reported in the media today, including in the Sydney Morning Herald, which are probably referring to, are factually wrong. First and foremost, CSIRO will continue their relationship with the Department of the Environment on the National Environmental Science Program. It will still be spending $83 million a year, $83 million per annum on climate change research, and the Oceans and Atmosphere Division of the CSIRO will continue to employ more than 300 people. However, there will be a stronger focus on abatement and mitigation strategies. In the words of the CSIRO CEO, Larry Marshall, Dr Marshall, we have spent probably a decade trying to answer the question, is the climate changing? After Paris, the question has been answered. The next question now is what we do about it.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Senator Singh, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, at the Paris Climate Conference, Mr Turnbull said, and I quote, "We do not doubt the implications of the science or the scale of the challenge." So if Mr Turnbull believes in the science of climate change, why has he cut the jobs of so many Australian climate scientists?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr President, I can only repeat, we'll continue to spend about $83 million a year on climate change mitigation adaptation research. The excellent climate science of CSIRO has provided guidance to government and industry across the range of climate change sciences. Its collaborative work on global and national measurement and modelling of the climate has been outstanding, and we're continuing to be committed to research on climate and climate modelling, and we have provided $23.9 million over 6 years to establish the Earth Systems and Climate Change Hub under the National Environmental Sciences Program.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Final supplementary question, Senator Singh.
How does the Prime Minister reconcile the abolition of 200 more science jobs with his claimed support for science and innovation? Aren't these drastic cuts just another example of Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull saying one thing and doing the exact opposite?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr President. All I can say is that Mr President, is that the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Minister for the Environment in Paris did Australia proud. They went there and they stood up for the Australian way of dealing with climate change. That's what they did, the Australian way.
Order. Point of order, Senator Wong.
The point of order is direct relevance. The question had nothing to do with what the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and whoever else did at Paris. It was a question that said, how does the Prime Minister reconcile the abolition of 200 more science jobs with his claimed support for science and innovation? Aren't these drastic cuts just another example of Prime Minister Turnbull doing one thing, saying one thing and doing the exact opposite.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Cabinet Secretary will remind you of the question and inform you have 43 seconds in which to answer. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Mr President. I can only repeat, the advice from the CSIRO is that there will be no net job losses within the organisation. What they are doing is realigning their resources with their priorities internally. And in the case of the climate change situation, they're looking at mitigation and adaptation measures.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Order.